All right. Welcome, everyone. We're so glad you could join us today for today's session on curriculum mapping. This subject is truly one that shapes how schools design, deliver, and demonstrate their programs. My name is Meg Rodgers. I head up the client experience here at Medtrics, and I'm so excited for today's webinar. I'm joined by our CEO and resident subject matter expert, Chris Tokodi. Sorry about that. And we have some other of our customer success teammates on the call listening in. So, Chris, to begin, why has curriculum mapping become such a defining priority for schools today?
Well, first, can we all hear me okay? Sounds good.
Yes, you're good.
All right, great. So there's a bunch of different reasons, but ultimately, I think the curriculum map is just the best way to really define what you're doing as a school. So, whether you're a med school, a vet school, a nursing school, or any other kind of school, uh, ultimately you're trying to produce a competent physician, nurse, veterinarian, etc., right? And so a curriculum map helps you define how exactly do we do that? It is almost like an order of operations or a set of steps that you take in order to produce that person. So having that laid out in such a way, provides clarity for the people working there, for higher level administrators. Here's what we're doing. If you're running a course or a specific session, here's what we're trying to accomplish in this session and how it relates to the grander goals, right? And then, of course, from an accreditation standpoint, they're going to ask for this kind of information. So if you already have it kind of set up in a system where you can easily get that out and report on it, do searches, it just looks great for an accreditation provider. So there's always that bonus too. I think you're on mute there.
So awesome. Thank you so much. So I think, we have our agenda here. That gives you a high level of what our goal is with today's webinar and also what we're going to cover today. So thank you so much, Chris, for that overview. And yeah, so this slide that I'm showing here highlights how mapping brings alignment across every level of learning. Chris, could you share why that alignment is so vital, not only for teaching day to day, but also for accreditation and long-term program success?
Now I'm muted, so we're going ping pong back and forth here. But I think it goes back again to what I was saying earlier, right? Like to break this down, I see some of the folks here, they've known me for a few years. They know I'm a bit more on the technical side. And so this is a input output kind of scenario, right? So we bring these things in, we have our curriculum map. This is what we do. These are the set of steps that we take in order to produce our output, a competent physician or nurse or veterinarian or what have you. And so just having this all laid out, it's just extremely valuable at all different levels. So if you're a course director and you're trying to figure out, well, what am I actually trying to do here? Am I missing something? Should I be incorporating this into my course? You could start looking at that curriculum map and figure out, well, maybe it's a little too early. Maybe that's better off in, step two here. Or maybe, no, I'm covering this topic here. They should really have some knowledge of this other thing. And so by having that curriculum map, you can make those decisions quickly, and especially having it in a system like Metrics where you just pull this stuff out. You can do it without a system too. I've worked with schools that, originally were on Excel files and that kind of thing, and the work can be done. It's just more difficult ultimately. But even if you aren't using a system like Metrics, I know we have some guests here potentially. Even in Excel, I'm going to go over some concepts here that should help with that. But ultimately, we do suggest using some kind of system for consistency and ultimately things like auditing, right? So curriculum map is an important thing. If you just have a shared spreadsheet hanging around, who has access, who made what edit and when. And these are all questions that are very hard to answer without a system. So ultimately, we do recommend using something, even if it's not us.
Amazing. So strong mapping isn't just organizational. It gives clarity and consistency, and both gives both faculty and accreditors confidence. So I love that. Oops, wrong way here. So today's focus, with that foundation in mind, let's look at where we'll focus today. We'll explore AI-driven mapping suggestions, practical workflows for linking sessions and to objectives, and reporting to validate coverage. So, Chris, of these themes, which do you think schools will find most transformative right away?
So in the way you phrase that question, transformative right away, I think the best thing we can offer for that is actually our AI mapping, right? So AI has been a hot topic for the last 2 years, 3 years, right? It's been in everything and everything, basically. And it's not always useful in all those things, but in our experimentation with AI in our own platform and just in our processes as a company, this has been one of the ways where it is actually quite useful. So a lot of the times when a school is undergoing a curriculum change or they're a new school, they're coming up with it as they go, there's a lot of inertia in getting things mapped specifically. It's one thing to create your objectives. It's another thing to map them to those higher level concepts, right? And a lot of times, especially with an established school, you have established faculty, they're teaching their courses, they're teaching their sessions, they're developing the content, right? They're very busy and asking them to do this other thing on top of that. Oh, well, please map your objectives for your 30 sessions back to the course objectives and so on and so on. It's a big ask, right? And so it can be hard to really get going. And so something like AI mapping, it's probably not going to be perfect, for anyone on the call that understands how AI works. It has limitations. But for something like this, it's reasonably accurate. And I find even more so than the mappings themselves, making that process easy for a faculty to start usually helps them to just continue and keep going, right? I like to liken it to if you ever tried to write something, right? Staring at that blank page is kind of intimidating. It's like, oh God, I got nothing. I got to start from scratch. I got to come up with all this stuff. But if you use AI to kind of boost you along, even if the mappings you don't agree with, you've now done the work. You've now thought about it and said, well, that's not right. And then you're probably just going to pick the next thing. Well, that one, that's what maps to this objective, not this other one, silly AI. But the fact that you've now been given suggestions and you're able to accept or reject those, that is valuable and it helps keep the process moving. It's that inertia, right? Getting people to start is usually the hardest part. So AI is where that can assist the most, I think. And now we swap the mutes. Swap the mutes.
Yeah, so I think that that sounds great. And yeah, let's take it away. Let's break it down. Let's go back to that pyramid and let's break it down and how that would roll out for you. I'm going to move
All right.
forward.
Yeah, I'm gonna steal the screen share here, so let me know when that looks good. Did that work? Is that
Yep.
looking good? Okay. So so I've done this as a training over the years for various clients, particularly focused against like faculty in understanding what each of these things mean, right? So a lot of times when you're talking to faculty, they're focused on their stuff. It's my course, it's my sessions, I know my stuff. And when you ask them to map up to a higher level of something, in this case, objectives, maybe they're not sure why is that valuable? What is it? What does it mean? And so it can be helpful to go through this kind of information with them. And then we do offer that as well, talking to faculty and kind of doing this training for a school, maybe a little more focused, not as general, but it's something we do and something that I think has always been found helpful. It helps with that inertia too, to have a training to talk about this. But we're going to go over these different levels, so to speak, in the objective map, the curriculum map, and what they mean. And so we'll start with this foundation. So global objectives, that's what we call them. This is I usually say it's the highest level of mapping. In the case of this visual, it's the foundation, right? So these global objectives are typically objectives that come from an accrediting body. So they're not coming from internal to your school, they're coming from some outside source. And the way to think about these is these are very broad, right? These are going to be big, broad concepts. They're not going to be very specific, and that's on purpose, right? Because the purpose of a curriculum map is to take a very large goal, like basically this doctor should be able to perform patient care, right? Like that's a very large goal. And the idea is you're going to break this thing down in these different levels to be able to get to the fine points of how do we do that? How do we make sure that one of our students is able to perform this, is able to take care of a patient effectively? And so you're going to see very broad topics here. Some examples from the medical school side here. So the AAMC has their physician competency reference set. CanMeds is another organization that we often see used among our clients to map to. And within Medtrics, you are able to map to any number of objective sets. It's basically up to you. So, vet schools, I believe it's AAVMC is a set there. There's CBVE competencies. There's lots of acronyms that we deal with on the day-to-day. But you're able to map to as many of those as you need to. There's no limitation on, hey, one set or the other. And then moving along here, I just have an example of that. So talking about that broadness of the global objective. So this is from the AAMC's physicians competency reference set. And you can see here, provide health care services to patients, families, and communities aimed at preventing health problems or maintaining health. Very broad concept. And so the idea is we're going to be breaking this down as we go into these different levels. So the next level on top of that are program objectives. So this is the first of the objectives that are actually going to be defined by your school. So this is something that your school comes up with, and it's kind of like you could think of it as your version of global objectives. These are going to be broad, big concepts. And I've also seen some institutions, they basically mirror the global objectives that their accrediting body has asked them to map to. And that's okay, right? It makes sense, especially as a starting off point. Curriculums change over time. If you're a new school, I'd say this is a great way to start and look at it and say, hey, they want us to figure out how we teach these things, how we produce a competent individual that can do these things. Shouldn't those also be our program objectives? Yeah, it does make sense to do that. So especially if you're a newer school, you're undergoing like a curriculum change and you're thinking about this, that's a great place to start. And it can be an effective place to also kind of finish too. Like it'll be a working curriculum map if you do that. And of course, it also makes that mapping portion where you map from program objectives to global objectives a little easier. It's basically one-to-one. And really, like I was saying, when you come up with these for your school, if you are creating your own, you want to put yourself in that same mindset as the people that came up with the global objectives, right? These are broad concepts. We're not trying to get into the minutia right here. That's going to be later as we break down the course and session level objectives. So here's some examples again of program objectives, and these are also going to be broad, right? These are not going to be that defined at this point. We're really going to start defining them when we get down to this next set. Course objectives. So this is where we really start breaking down how we deal with these larger concepts. You mostly want to make sure that these objectives are unique to a course, right? Maybe you do have some objectives that are utilized in multiple courses, that can make sense. But if you're trying to really create like as close as you can get to the best curriculum map for your school, you want to consider that these things should be unique to the course. The courses are different, so therefore they should have different objectives. And the big idea here is now is where you're starting to narrow it down. So we have this overall goal of we need to teach people to be able to take care of patients. While perhaps in this course, one of the first things we talk about is taking a patient history and how we do that, right? That would be taking a broad concept like teaching someone how to take care of a patient to a more actionable step, which is, well, first thing is you might need to take a patient history. And so that's a way you can think about this. What are the steps to providing patient care? Where do we teach those? Those are good things for course objectives. And then that's also a good way to fulfill this last bullet point, which is how does our course objective fulfill our program objective? If our program objective is our students should be able to take care of patients, then taking a patient history makes sense as a step in that. And throughout your curriculum for each course, you should be building on that. And if we look here, we start to kind of see that more developed, not developed, is a broken down concept. So, effectively working groups demonstrates honesty, compassion, learn the proper use of medical technology. So this is more uh, detailed than something like a global or program objective. And then we get down to the last portion here, session objective. So this is in our thing here, this is the highest point. If you look at it from a tree view, this would be the lowest point, but ultimately it's the most focused. It's the most narrow. It's the most kind of step by step. What is happening in this session or this class to help this person become a doctor, a vet, a nurse? What are we doing? And how does that then map up to the course objectives? So if one of our course objectives is teaching someone how to take a patient history, then in one of these sessions, we should be teaching about the details of that. So what are the steps to taking a patient history? How do you accomplish those steps? What tools do you use to accomplish that steps? How do you collaborate with your team in taking a patient history? Any number of these things could be something that you might have in a session objective, but this is just meant to be the most detailed version of an objective. It's the most minute, it's the most clear step, right? It's not broad, it's very detailed and specific. And so you would have those in metrics as well. And I'll be showing you shortly how in the system you would create these, manage these, map these, etc. But before I do that, I'm now going to get into my data nerdy territory with all this. This is one of my favorite topics, which is coding, right? So, as you might have noticed in all those screenshots, along with the different objectives, you always see this little thing next to it called a code. And I have it highlighted here in this screenshot. And so there's no real rules to coding. Right now, metrics, we also don't really enforce any rules. It is up to you what kind of coding you want to do. But there are very clear benefits to taking the time to come up with like a coding structure, right? And some of the reasons why are kind of labeled here. So context is very important when it comes to these things, right? So you might have an objective, but on its own, without the context of how and where it's taught, what course is it taught in? What kind of session is it taught in? If you don't have that context along with it, that changes your view on it sometimes. It's not specific enough. You don't have enough detail to really assess that objective and what does it really mean without that additional context. And so when you're using a system like metrics and you're using the system directly, you'll pretty much always have that context. We'll always tell you what course it's in, what session it's related to, what type of session that is. Is it a lab? Is it a lecture? What are how do we assess them in that session? What are some of the keywords that are used in that session? All of that exists within metrics, within the context of the platform. But despite all of our efforts, inevitably what happens is these objectives get pulled out of the platform into an Excel of some kind. They get shared and moved around in email or posted somewhere or etc. And when that happens, a lot of that context is lost. Just it's in the ether, it's gone now, right? Because all we have is the objective itself. But we notice that when people do that, they almost always also include the code because they're always right next to each other and it kind of makes sense. Oh yeah, I'll throw the code in there too. And so that's why we often talk about making sure that you kind of bake into that code that context, right? And the level of detail that you want to go into there is up to you. It's up to what matters for your program. A good example of that is in working with some vet schools recently, we've started adding species. into the coding structure for the schools. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense for human medicine. I think we all agree we're dealing with humans, but in the context of vet medicine, that makes a lot of sense. An objective for one species versus another, even if it's the same objective, might be a little bit different, right? There's different nuances to that. And so coming up with a coding structure helps someone to immediately understand what where in that curriculum map this objective lives, even if they can't see the map. Just by seeing this, they know what's going on. And just to break down what's in this one, this is an example of a session objective that you might have in the system. And this follows a pretty simple coding structure. Starts with the course, Anatomy 100. Got that? Know that? This is taught in the first lab in Anatomy 100. It's a patient care related objective, and it's the first one. So this is the first patient care objective that we teach in the first lab of Anatomy 100. So I know that just by looking at that code. I don't need the context in the system. And then when this gets chopped up inevitably and sent around and through email all over the world, we'll still have this, most likely. I can't force them to keep that code on there, but it usually ends up sticking on there. And so by having that in your system, it becomes useful. And also now you can use it to search too. And I'll be showing that in a little bit as well. And so here are just some kind of common coding styles that we often see used throughout our clients. So here, global objectives, you usually don't have to think about this too much because normally that objective set usually comes with its own coding and that crediting body is expecting those codes. So we pretty much load those up as is. Though if you ever wanted to create your own for some reason, you certainly could follow some kind of structure. It starts to matter more down on the program and course session or program, course, and session objectives because those are your objectives, right? So you have full control over that coding. It doesn't necessarily need to align with any other third-party stuff. So at the program level, there's usually not too much to do, right? You might do something like just identifying the program. So if you're doing like a combined program like MD, MPH, maybe there's some objectives that are specific to MPH. So you can toss that in there to make that clear in the code. Competency, does this cover patient care? Does this cover medical knowledge? Is this system-based practice or collaboration or whatever? It can be useful to have that in there. And then we always just say increment it, right? First, second, third. There's usually some kind of order to it. Maybe it's not as specific as this is the first objective, second objective, third objective, but the first, second, and third objective are probably different than the 30th or 40th objective when you look at a whole course, right? So even if the numbers don't specifically matter, like in the context of a session, it can matter when you look at the context of all the sessions in a course. So it's always important to keep a number. And then this is just kind of good data practice. All these should be unique, right? You don't really want to have the same codes used throughout multiple sessions. It could just add confusion unnecessarily. Going down to course level objectives, same idea here, but just include the course code. Makes sense, right? So this way, anytime I'm looking at this, I know this is coming from Anatomy 100. And then the last one here, this is where it really becomes the most useful when you're down at this level, down at the session level, because this is where you can add the most stuff. And this is where you want to think about what is going to be useful for your school. So I provided that example with veterinary medicine. Other types of schools probably don't need species to be part of this, right? But in their case, it makes sense to have canine, bovine, equine, because that provides necessary context when people are reviewing these objectives, when you're doing reporting or just doing a curriculum review and trying to figure out where we teach stuff. That can be extremely important. And again, once it eventually leaves this system, which it always does at some point, now that context follows along with it, even if you're not viewing it in the system. All right, let me get a sip of water here.
Here's where the concepts come to life, Chris. Could you walk us through how faculty can review, edit, approve objectives and metrics, and how does that support both flexibility and consistency?
Yep, absolutely. So Let me know if this is looking okay here. I'm going to switch into the actual system now of metrics. Does that look okay, Meg?
It does, yes.
Okay, perfect. So now that we talked about these concepts, we can also look at them in system a little bit, getting down to a little bit more nitty-gritty of like how this stuff actually gets put into the system. So I'm going to be doing this from the administrator's perspective, so I have access to everything. It's just easier to do this for a webinar. But when you set up permissions at Metrics, you can make sure that course directors have access to making changes related to their courses only. You can give them view access to other courses, but they'll be limited to making changes just to their courses. And then you can even go down to the session level if you're defining, hey, Dr. So-and-so, they're the leader of this first session in this course. You can give them permissions over that session so they can just come in and make changes to the objectives if you need to. That's one way to do it. Other schools, they prefer to have more of a centralized approach, right? Kind of people have view access, but if you want to make changes to the curriculum map, you don't really give that to the faculty level, so to speak. They make requests, there's a process in place, and there's a more centralized person that actually makes the changes. And both methods work ultimately, and both methods work in metrics. It's really what makes the most sense for your personnel and your other processes, right? But you can do both in here. I'm going to be doing it from the perspective of an administrator, just so I don't have to switch around as much. And so if you go to curriculum on your left nav, that's where you'll see the whole curriculum stuff. And so we'll start with the global objectives here. And for the most part, if you're a client of ours, we will probably just load these up for you at the beginning of starting with us. Because again, these are coming from accrediting bodies. We already have copies of this stuff that we can just create for you in the system. But I can use this as a quick example. You can see objectives are coming kind of like two parts, really. So there are sections, and you'll find in all these global objective sets and so on that they'll always be turned into sections. So you can see this is from CanMeds. This is their communicator section. And under communicator, they have a set of different objectives that are related to communication. Same thing for AAMC, knowledge for practice. If we go down, interpersonal and communication skills, etc. Right? And so it's very easy to create these. We can just make a new section. We have a code, we have a description, we have another secondary description that we call competency here, but it's really just a bunch of text fields. And you can determine what you want to show up here. You can always easily edit these. So if I just want to add two S's to it for some reason, I can do that. And I can make new objectives as well. So, when you do so, you probably want to respect whatever coding mechanism you see here. So let's say I did want to add a new objective, and not saying that you do want to do that here, because these are global objectives. You probably don't want to mess with them. But these mechanisms are going to be the same uh, throughout the different levels. So if you can make an objective on the global objective level, same thing all the way down. Program, course, and session all work the same way. So this is some other objective. Hopefully they would come up with something a little better than that. Save and close, and there we are. There's our new objective. And what we would use to upload into the system are these CSV uploads. So if you're someone that's a little more like spreadsheet minded and you like structured data and uploading into systems, we got you covered with this. You could just download a template, fill it out, and this way upload everything all at once instead of going piecemeal one by one here. And if you're starting with us, we'll usually do this as part of like our initial roundup of data. We'll help you kind of find your data in your systems. Where is it? Get it into our format. So this way we can just upload it easily enough to get you started. So that's on the global objective level. And then this concept is basically the same at the program objective level. We're just at a different level, but works the same way. You can edit, you can create, you can add new sections, etc. We also have the upload of CSVs here, but the new concept that gets added here is mapping. So now we can map to something. So we have our global objectives on the left here after we go to our mapping tab. We've got program objectives on the right. And as you can see here, some mapping has already been done here. You got search fields on both sides. And to do the mapping in metrics, you just simply grab one of these global objectives and you drag it over to wherever you want it. And I guess I didn't get it quite right there, but there it goes, right? So that's all there is to mapping on the global objective to program objective level. And this, if this is something that you've already done kind of outside the system, then you can also make use of our CSVs to upload that mapping in bulk. If you know which program objectives are linked to which global objectives, we can just upload that in bulk for you. Don't need to go through this process one by one in the system. And that is our general recommendation too, right? So we should do bulk uploads for everything that we can do bulk uploads on when we get started. And then after that, then use the system to do more piecemeal changes. You don't want to do this, there could be hundreds or thousands of objectives. You don't want to do that one by one. It's better to do that via upload and then start making tweaks in the system in the method I just showed you. Then going down a bit more, session objectives. Well, not session yet, course objectives. So course objectives, again, it's very much the same. The difference here is that you're going to pick a course first. So in this case, I know anatomy has some objectives for me. So under the course anatomy, here are my different objectives. As you can see, some are very detailed as well. Stuff. We teach stuff at the School of Metrics. And so not a whole lot different here. The mapping page is a little bit different. And the other thing I want to point out here is I mentioned earlier that faculty can have access to this same thing. So if someone is a director for a course, they can manage their course, right? And so instead of seeing all the courses show up here, they would see the limited list of what they can manage. So in this case, I know anatomy has some objectives for me. And so the mapping here is a little bit different because there's more to it. On global to program level, there's usually not as much going on, so it's a little easier to do the drag and drop. But here we've gone for more of a search and select. So if I just said, hey, this objective here really just maps to the entire program objective of knowledge for practice, I can do that. And I can get that done quickly. This also supports searching. So for example, I see the word goals up there, and then these are the different objectives that have to do with goals. So this is a fast way to do the mapping. But again, this is something we recommend after doing an initial upload of what you already have. And then that makes it a lot easier to just come in and tweak these things. And then finally, we go down to the session objective level. And so this is kind of the same again, except you pick a course first, and then you get a list of the different objectives that exist, or not the different sessions that exist under that course. And if we go to the objective tab, we do the same thing, pick our course, and then I think session 2 has some stuff for me here. And so these are the objectives for session 2 of the anatomy course. And all of this works the same. And then down here, the mapping also works the same, except you're doing the same step here. You pick the course, then you pick the session, or actually it's this one. Then you pick the session, and then this is the same as the course to program mapping level. So that all pretty much works the same, but there's one specific thing I want to show here for session objectives, and this is where AI mapping comes in. So this is the first place where we've actually implemented into the system AI mapping. We've done mapping for schools outside of the system and then imported it in, but this one has actually made it into the system, and then we expect to do some more stuff with this coming up. So if you go to curriculum mapping, and then we'll go to the where I was working, so this older academic period, and then we have anatomy here. Open that up, we have the different sessions. Open up a session, we have the different objectives under that session. And so some of these may be unmapped, like for example, this one doesn't have mapping right now. And someone can come in here and quickly use this interface to map as well, just like we did on that other interface. The difference here is that we could click this Run AI Mapping button. And in this case, we could see there's actually nothing that matches or doesn't pass the smell test with our mapping infrastructure there. So I could try another one. And in this case, I must have had something set up here. This is probably my internet connection not working. But what it would do, of course, I have to do this on my on my local environment where this could be an issue. But the idea here would be is it would return some mapping suggestions from that course, and then the faculty would have the ability to either accept or reject that suggestion, right? And this is what I was talking about earlier, where even if that mapping is not correct, so to speak, for that faculty member, for them to go through this and know that no, that's not right, that is helping break that inertia of getting people to do something. And that's usually the hardest part, getting it started. So even if this AI mapping is not perfect, and I guarantee you that it won't be, that's not how mapping works. It's not a 100% success rate with something like this. That's impossible. But if it helps you move things forward, it's valuable. And so we've seen that with our clients using either this interface but also just helping them do mapping in bulk. If we already have all the objectives, then we can run it through this tool, and it's easier to go through and edit mappings than it is to come up with them from scratch, kind of like that analogy I used earlier with staring at a blank page, right? It's easier to edit something than to come up with something from scratch. Let me take some more water here.
And I'm going to take that opportunity. A common question we see when we're talking to clients is, how do we demonstrate or show that our curriculum truly covers what it should, whether it's accreditation or this is where the search and reporting would be powerful. Can you explain how schools use these tools not just to confirm coverage, but to spot gaps before an accreditor ever does?
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's what doing all this is for, right? So you put all these objectives into the system, you map them all up in this way so that you can do that kind of work and you can find the gaps and maybe not even like gaps necessarily, but I was almost like prerequisites, right? Where you could say, well, we're teaching this here, but this is like a higher level concept. Shouldn't we approach it earlier and talk about it in this earlier course? Right? Stuff like that. So by having all that in the system, you can actually start doing that kind of thing. And one of the best places to start that out is the search view, right? And so from here, and I'll just do some quick demonstrations here. Of course, you can search for different objective text. I'm just going to click search for the sake of it. And so what this will return, right now it's returning all my objectives, but I could see what objectives I have, what courses they're taught in. And when I do this little expand here, I can see how that's mapped to other levels of my map here. So this objective is mapped to a patient care objective in lecture one, right? And this is where that coding comes into place here, because just by reading these codes, I pretty much know where this is happening. So I know that this course objective is addressed in the first lecture of this course. And I can tell that just by reading the codes in this coding map. So more benefits to doing that coding than just what I was talking about. You get benefits in system too. And so you have these tree maps that you could do. You can also view these details in system. So this is for the course level here. You can also do the same thing on the session level. So you can see the orange part here is now going to be on the session level. And we can see that this is that lecture one patient care objective. And I can see that's covering two different course objectives out of the course, right? And I can identify that quickly. That's one way to do it with objectives only. We do have other concepts in the system that, probably don't have time to get into deeply today because we focus mostly on objective mapping. But we also have this concept of keywords, right? So keywords are something that get applied to sessions. And you can say, in this session, we cover this keyword, keyword, right? And that is sometimes more effective than just trying to slam all those keywords into an objective, because then it kind of stops reading like an objective. It's just a set of jumbled keywords. So using the actual keywords in metrics are a better way to do that. And so again, I just have a simplified version of this, but I could just say, show me where we teach about the brain. And so I could just click that and I will identify what sessions do we teach in the brain, when do they happen, what other keywords are used in there. And then we also have a concept of theme that can be used here. So I've seen, going back to a vet school example, I've seen species here. Oftentimes with medical schools, I see organ systems under themes. So, you might have a set of keywords that are specific to the cardiovascular system, right? A lot of different, very specific keywords. But if you just want to know where do you teach about the cardiovascular system, that's a great thing to use a theme for. And then you can see basically in chronological order where and when we teach about the cardiovascular system. And that's when you can really get into stuff like, like I said, look, maybe not the best term for a prerequisite, but if you're teaching a more advanced concept in a later course, you want to make sure that you're appropriately covering all the topics that will help people understand that when they get there. And so looking at it in this chronological type view makes that easy to do and also very valuable. Uh, we didn't talk about this much here, and probably talk to us if you're one of our clients on the call about content as well. So we can host content that are related to sessions. We have this very nifty search fields here for this too. And so we could see what kind of content we use in those sessions. So I could find something in keywords and say, hey, we're teaching about the brain in that session. Well, what stuff do we do in that? It's a lab. Is there a specific, PowerPoint that goes with that? Is there a set of instructions? Is there a video? Like whatever, that can be stored in the content here. You can use all these things together to really get a full sense of your curriculum. And then the last thing I want to show here that kind of talks about, well, maybe not the last thing, but one of the newer things that we've done is update our curriculum map objective tree view. And so this has been pretty useful since we put it out. It's pretty new, like within the last 2 months or so, we redid this page. And this will show you the entire curriculum map. So if you remember when we did that search, we showed that kind of like expanded tree view. So this will do that, but it will do it for your entire curriculum all at once, which can be pretty powerful. I haven't tried it yet, but this also seems like something that would look great on like one of those plotter printers. You could probably print this thing out entirely and just post it on the wall. That might be kind of fun. But it's got a couple of good examples here of things we could do with our data. So in this, and I still got to think if this is the best terminology. People seem to like it well enough, but we have orphans and dead ends, right? And so basically that means if I look at my program objectives, I have 15 total objectives. Well, 15 objectives that have some kind of missing piece, right? So a program objective, it kind of sits in the middle. It's not at the top or the bottom of the map, which means it should have some relationship to its parents, aka the global objectives, and it should have relationships to its children, course objectives. So if I look here, I can identify that these two program objectives, they don't map up to global objectives. So that's probably something I need to address. And then these other 13 program objectives don't map down to course objectives, right? And so by looking at this, and you could pull this out in Excel and et cetera to work it around people and have them take a look at it. But this is a great way to look at your map and see what's missing, right? Structurally, where are things not linked together? And that can be a great way to review the curriculum as well. And then we also just have, reports. So, I mentioned spreadsheets a number of times. So if you go to reports and curriculum, there's a bunch of different reports here. One of the most common ones that you're going to see is this mapping relationship report. And so this is where I mentioned where even though you sometimes lose the context of these things when you export data from the system, put it in Excel and kind of send it around to people, we always keep the code with it, right? So again, if you do coding in an effective way, you can always tell where the objective is coming from just by looking at the code itself. And so this is a way to identify what global objectives are mapped to what program, course, or session objectives. And this will give you a nice big Excel output that basically mimics that tree view. It shows the relationships between these things, but it'll give it to you in Excel sheet for those that are more comfortable with that. But that's where the coding comes in, right? We've got to keep it with the objective, so we always keep the context with it. And so there's other reports here too, like our keywords report. And then I talked early on in this talk, I talked about like who made a change and when, right? which if you're dealing with like a shared spreadsheet among a lot of different people, that's basically impossible to keep track of. So here we have our changes over time report that will show you when a change and by who was made to an objective or a keyword. And then we have other useful reports here more administratively, right? So time spent, you can see how much time a faculty member spends teaching labs, for example, or in a particular course, how is our time spent, right? Is it 20% labs, 40% lecture, 20% something else? You can start to understand all that just by having the data in the system. And then there's more administrative stuff here down to the scheduling, right? And one of the favorite ones I like to point out there is the overlap report. Very helpful administrative report. If someone gets double booked or if a room gets double booked for a session, this can help identify that in the system and you can take care of it before problems happen. So a number of the things that I showed as part of the system, there's all kinds of reporting and search capability around it as well as other things that we didn't go into today, but more administrative things and the scheduling of the sessions and things like that.
So essentially, reporting becomes a safeguard and strategic guide, helping the schools stay prepared while continuously improving. Great stuff, Chris. Thank you. So yeah, so in the deck, let me.
Is well, I'll take it. I got it. I got it.
All right, cool.
I had
So
to remember where I was.
I
I'm
know,
sharing.
I know. We've seen why mapping matters, how it's put into practice, and how reporting ties everything together. But let's open things up. What questions do you have about applying this in your own programs? What pain points are you seeing? Let's hear from you, from those on the call. Got some questions?
I was
Um,
talking there. Please ask some questions while I'm here. If not, I'm sure I'll talk to you later. Yeah, if you don't want to
Claude,
ask the
we do
question
have
here.
something from Claude here. It says,
Okay.
my institution is converting the subject-based curriculum to system-based. This will be done in a stepwise manner over the course of 5 semesters. Would it be easier to create a completely different curriculum map rather than try to modify the existing subject-based curriculum map that
Ooh,
we have in Medtrics?
Claude. Claude with the good question, right? Nice and detailed. So, the answer I'm going to give you is a typical answer, and it depends, right? So let's pop into the system and just talk about a concept real quick. I didn't really talk about this because I focused more on the mapping and objective side of things. But what Claude is referring to here is basically academic periods, right? So in metrics, all the curriculum is always tied to a academic period. So this is the curriculum in the state that it was in this period of time. And so what you do, and this is more of an administrative function, but you get to migrate the curriculum. So you basically say, okay, we're starting the next year. I'm going to take the curriculum from one, migrate it to the subsequent year, and here's what I'm going to move over. Mostly you move over pretty much everything, unless you're kind of doing like a complete rewrite. So it's a tough question to answer. I guess it would come down to how complete is the new curriculum, right? Because what I've helped schools do is kind of like intelligently kind of retire parts of the curriculum as new ones are added. So usually you want to pick a time when, okay, this is going to be the first class on our new curriculum is going to be in 2027 or whatever. So when that first class comes in, you're basically retiring the old set of first year courses, and then you're entering the new set of first year courses. And so it really comes down to the management of it internally. So the system can handle both. Generally, my advice would be if the curriculum is not already figured out, we could do it in a stepwise manner. We just have to be, a little smart about it, make sure that we are removing the courses. So we'll do a full migrate to the next year. We'll take the first year courses out. We'll put the new first year courses in, and then we leave it like that until the next year, at which point we migrate again. Then we take the year two courses out, put the new ones in, and we just kind of build on it layer over layer like that. If you already have the full curriculum, though, you could just pick a future academic period, load it all in there. So either will work. I would say from a like source of truth perspective, the first way is probably a little better because it is an accurate representation of what's happening at the school in that year, right? There's a new curriculum starting up in year one, but everyone else is probably still on the old curriculum and kind of slowly phasing that out. So it is a more correct representation of what's happening. But happy to talk about that more. That's a very specific question, like to your school and managing that. But that would be a good thing to talk about maybe on a call. We could handle that. But we could do it either way. For me, the decision comes down to how much of it is done. If it's mostly done, I might just put it in its own period. If it's something that we're just going to build over time, I would probably do it in a stepwise manner. I think that's how I would kind of make that call.
Incredible.
Good question, Claude. Nice one.
Nice. We have a couple questions from Teresa. She first asks, what does theme represent or refer to? And then the second piece is, well, does Medtrics allow for the addition of custom mapping fields, columns to add details of interest for an institution at the session level?
Okay. So no on the custom fields, but I wonder if it's also kind of handled by keywords and themes in general. So why don't I talk about that? It depends on what those things are, right? I don't know what they are, so I can't really answer that. But, keywords and themes are really powerful, and you don't have to use them in this same way, right? So here I have it very clearly, parts of the brain, heart, etc. Those are keywords. But from a technical standpoint, these are just tags that are applied to a session. So if there's some other kind of institutional interest that you want to identify and be able to say, oh, well, we deal with this in session A, B, C, then there's no reason you can't use keywords for that. And the same goes for sessions, or not sessions, themes, right? So themes are also custom created. You can have any keywords you want. You can have any themes that you want. So if you have these kinds of concepts where you're trying to track when and where they occur in your curriculum, keywords and themes are a great way to do that. And the way I tend to think about them is almost in like a parent-child relationship. A theme is like a higher level thing. So the example I used during the call is a decent one, right? So I've seen a lot of schools use organ systems as themes, cardiovascular, lymphatic, etc. And so, and then the keywords are kind of complementary to that, right? So coronary vessels, heart, etc. I'm not a doctor. These are brain things, not heart things. But that's how I would break it down from a data perspective. Themes are a larger, some kind of organization, organ systems are common. But again, if you have other needs that you don't think fit into keywords or themes, I might rethink that because ultimately it's just a way to tag a thing. It's a way to tag a session and say this occurs here. So some of these are medical concepts, some of those could be administrative. It doesn't really matter. You can pull reports on either and identify it. So interesting question, and would love to go into more detail later with you and see what that means. But I would think that most of this can be handled with themes or keywords. And then also, we didn't talk about it really much at all. I mentioned it briefly as content, right? But that's yet another method that you can use to identify things. So if we go here, and this is also all customizable. This is using some language from the AAMC, or at least I believe it is here. Yeah, these method types, right? So this is basically saying like, how do we teach it? So maybe we have this is a session. Our course objective is, how to take patient history. In this session, we talk about these specific things about patient history. Well, how do we teach that? Well, maybe it's case-based learning. It's a conference, it's a demonstration, it's a game, it's a lab, it's a lecture. So these are all things that are coming from the AAMC, but these are also customizable. and searchable in your curriculum. So I would think that most of what you're looking to do, we could do with themes, keywords, or the concept of what I'll generically call methods. And they're typically instructional methods, how we teach. There are assessment methods, which is how we assess if people learn the thing that we teach. Is it a quiz? Is it a test, an exam? Is it a narrative assessment? Whatever. And then last, we have resources, which is usually neither of those things. It's just like PowerPoints, links to videos, what do we use to help teach the thing? But I would think between all those things, we could probably do what you're asking for without having to go into custom fields because there's a lot of customizability just here. So would love to hear more, but I would think we could handle it through that stuff.
The viewers want you to try to show the AI feature again. See if your internet
Ah,
change. We want to see some bells and
we'll
whistles here.
see. Bells and whistles. Let me see. I might try it on one of the other servers here. So for those of you that are technically minded, you'll see I'm on my local instance. I do that for speed, right? It's speed. But sometimes it doesn't communicate as well with the outside world. So I figure that's what happened there. So give me a second here. I'll see if I could do some bells and whistles for you.
Yeah, no problem. I think there is also clarification on how to find it in the system as well. So, uh,
Yes. So I'll do that here while I try the other server here. But it's under curriculum map and mapping, right? And then in my case, I'm going to go back to the earlier academic year because that's where I have data. So you'll see the courses here. Then you can break down those courses into different sessions. Different sessions have different objectives. And then this is where the AI mapping thing is. I'm going to click the button and see what happens. Hey, see, it's just the connection thing. I'm pretty
you
sure on
get
my local,
Susan's
but
lock
the
on
second time it works once people log off and don't see
it.
it, right? Yeah. But anyway, so this is what it would look like. And so this is what I mentioned about accepting or rejecting, right? So I think the primary value of this is just getting people in the mindset of doing the mapping. And so now they have a little assistant to help them do that, give them suggestions, and then they can say, okay, you know what? That one does make sense. I accept it. Hey, AI, you know what you're talking about. I reject that one, right? But this helps get it moving. And that's usually the hardest part of doing any project like this is getting people to kind of buy in and get past that initial inertia. And so this is one of the ways we're doing this in the system. And I can't show it to you yet because it's not in that kind of state. But this is also coming for more than session objectives. It's on our test block probably in the next couple of weeks here. But we can also help outside of the system. That's a project that we've done a few times for different clients where we've just taken all the objectives, we run it through our own AI here to do the mapping in bulk. It's not in the system, but we could do it outside the system and then bring it in easily enough. So that's a project we've done with a few clients to pretty good results. And we also get to tweak our prompting, right? So if you're into AI, a lot of that has to do with prompting and you kind of get in what you put in, right? Or you get out what you put in with the prompting. So usually once we get a sense of how the curriculum for your school works, we tend to modify the prompt a little bit and then get a much better result the second time around. And then we end up importing that one. I'd say it's like a 70+% kind of hit rate, which when you're talking about thousands of objectives, saves a lot of time.
Amazing. So I think as we close, I do want to thank you all for spending time with us. Chris, sorry I butchered your name in the beginning.
Ah,
Tosh got in my head and said,
ah,
"Don't pronounce it the other way," and then
Todoki? Everyone says Todoki.
I
Yeah.
know I knew how to pronounce it before he said that, and then I lost it. So, but yeah, so please feel free. I don't know if you have the slide available, Chris, with the
Oh,
survey.
yes,
We
I
are going to ask.
can. Here it is.
Yeah, we're going to ask you for some feedback, of course. We want to hear how we're doing. Also, if there are some problems or challenges you're seeing that are really just keeping you up at night, they're really important to you, ways that you want to optimize the system. Perhaps we have some ways that aren't obvious to use our system to save you time, document generation and having outbound messages, prompted automations there. So a lot of really cool things that we're doing to help answer some pain points for our customers. So fill out the survey, reach out to your client specialist, reach out to us if you have any of those pain points, if you have any questions, and I hopefully you'll join us for next month's webinar. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks for listening to me drone on. See ya.